Right, this is the third video of lecture chapter 13 is leisure fair. And in this chapter video, we're going to talk about very important concept called leisure constraints. Leisure constraints are basically barriers, but we're not going to call them barriers because some of the barriers are not the things that we consider as barriers. Like, there's a little thing that in front of you in your way and it's stopping you, right? It's visible, tangible things. It's not necessarily like that. It could be something that in you, like in your mind, for example, that stop you from wanting to go that way, if you will, even. You don't even want to do certain things. And we're going to talk about those things a little more detailed way in the next few slides. Now, leisure constraints are the factors that limit the formation of leisure preferences. So in this way, you don't even want to do certain leisure, or you want to do certain leisure, and or to inhibit or prohibit participation and enjoyment in leisure. Inhibit and prohibit here actually means very specific thing, although in common language, it's the same thing. Inhibit means that your participation may be altered because of the constraints, but you're still doing some form of that activity. For example, you want to work out, right? And hopefully you want to go to the gym and work out in a big spacious, with the new, with the various tools, equipment. But, well, COVID-19, you can't do that. So you're going to stay at home and you're going to use your, body weight with the video, YouTube video, and you're going to work out. So you're working out. But because of that constraints, COVID-19 and everything, you altered your participation, right? You changed. And that's inhibit. Prohibition is really, you're not doing that. You're not doing working out at all. Does that make sense? There are three main types of leisure constraints that have been studied over and over. And it's very important. The first category is called intrapersonal constraints. They are individual psychological qualities that affect the formation of leisure preferences. So if you're affected by this, you don't even want to do certain things. And it's considered to be the most powerful constraints just because of that. Because it takes away your preference, right? You don't even want to do certain things. How are you going to do that if you don't want to? The example here is, for example, negative attitudes towards certain leisure activity, perceived lack of skills, perceived inappropriateness of certain things. For example, a gender is a good one, right? As a man, as a boy, you don't feel like, oh, I should be doing this activity, maybe, dancing, certain dance. You don't feel like you're good at certain sports like basketball, then you're not going to do that. Negative attitude toward a certain type, maybe exercise. It's sweaty, I don't like it, I don't feel comfortable. I don't think it's even good for my health either. So most likely you're not going to do that activity. Those are intrapersonal constraints. Next category is interpersonal constraints. So that's a very important difference, right? It's a tricky intra and inter. These are social interactions and social roles that intervene between leisure preferences and participation. What that means is that you have a preference, you want to do certain things, and now you're going to go get out and try to do it, get up and do it, and then you face this issue, basically. For example, lack of companion. I want to play badminton. Hey, I need a partner. If I don't, how am I going to do badminton, right? It's playing badminton by yourself is very, very sad. That's not going to work. That's a barrier. Negative attitudes of your partner. For example, let's say a partner can be, activity partner or just general partners like significant others. When I try to get, play a video game, online game, and my wife may go like, she may not have a good attitude toward video game, especially adults playing video game. Like, a lot of people don't have a good attitude to that. And she goes like, Shin, you're a freaking adult. You are a professor. You shouldn't be playing those things. And then I feel that that's a pressure. That's the, that's a interpersonal pressure that I get. It could affect my leisure behavior and experience. Gender roles and norms, that's a very tricky one because earlier we talked about gender, perceived gender, appropriateness, inappropriateness. When it's internalized in our mind, that's more of an intrapersonal. But when it's coming from other people around you, family member, friends, for example, or wider society communities, like, oh, boys shouldn't be doing this, girls shouldn't be doing this, for example. Now, that's more of interpersonal issues. Finally, the third category is structural. It's basically everything else. It's external environmental constraints that intervene between leisure preference and participation. A classic example would be a lack of time. You don't have a time. I can't. You don't have the money because a lot of leisure activity needs the money for equipment, the program, transportation. Well, transportation is the next one. Do you have a car? Especially like right now because of COVID-19, very important question, right? Because you don't want to rely on a public transportation. Facility. Do you have a badminton court where you can play or not? That's a big one. There are so many other factors. Weather is another good one too, especially in Edmonton. It's super cold in here. So there you go. It's difficult to have a leisure outside. Now we talked about so many basically, discrimination, privilege, constraints that explains the negative situation that we have in terms of how leisure can be unfair, right? Now, what about positive side of it? How can we address them? There are some concepts here, and one of the important concept is inclusion, right? And that's discussed in the chapter. What that is the involvement and full acceptance of all people, and that's very important, within the wide range of community setting. What that means is that inclusive programs and inclusion by definition is not for example, people with a certain type of disability. That's not inclusion. When you have creates a program that can be played by many people with certain condition or not, that's inclusive. That we mean very specific things in our field, inclusion. All people, as many as possible, of course, always it's very difficult, if not impossible, to include literally everyone. But the idea is try to get everyone, right? And there are 3 levels of inclusion. And Professor Schlein, he was a very famous professor who studied recreation, inclusion, therapeutic recreation, what's called a therapeutic recreation. We use a recreation for people with disabilities. Now, physical access is a level 1, stage 1, right? The people with a certain condition, people from certain minority status, they have to be able to get there. You're doing certain activity at a gym, then that person should be able to enter the gym, right? The second level is functional. That person, the people who should be able to successful you don't have to be an Olympian, right? Elite athlete. But for example, you're playing basketball, wheelchair basketball. Can that person shoot and make the ball to the hoop? So there's actually possibility of the successful shot, right? If not, really, there's no functional inclusion. And finally, third level is the highest level, social or emotional. It's one thing to let them come accessibility, right? The physically included, functionally included. Maybe you tweak the game a little bit so that everybody can be successful. Now, socially, can they meaningfully interact with each other? Can they bond with each other? Can they have fun with each other? And that's the highest level. And it's kind of scaffolding in a way that you have to go one by one. We need a physical inclusion for us to achieve functional inclusion. And functional achievement is necessary for social achievement and inclusion. Another key concept is diversity. And what it is, it's celebrating differences. Diversity refers to basically variety and differences across people, in people, right? So that's a little different from inclusion in a way, because inclusion in a sense, it was about everybody, right? coming from majority background or minority background, you want to include as many people as possible. Diversity is a little different in that, because it's really shedding a light and highlighting the uniqueness and the differences of certain groups, especially in this case, minority groups typically. For example, in Edmonton, we have had, of course, COVID-19 changed a little bit, but Edmonton's Indigenous People Festival, featuring different, peoples, different tribes, cultures, dances, and many things. Now, that's only for basically Indigenous peoples, right? That's not to include other culture, because, celebrating certain differences, certain uniqueness, certain pocket of the people. And that's what the diversity is in this sense. Now, that's a little different from pluralism, which is definition is right there. Coexistence. And that's a key, right? And again, that's different culture, different belief, different custom, different lifestyles. They function together. For example, the chapter talked about sports teams scheduling practices and competitions around the holiday, time of Ramadan, which is a month or so in their Islamic calendar and their in Islam, where Muslim people who believe in Islam do fasting from the sunrise to sundown, basically. So it's very challenging, and it's actually dangerous for athletes, high performance athletes, to function during this time, right? So some sports teams and leagues try to avoid that as well. So you can see how people from certain religious background, which is not necessarily mainstream in Canada, nicely coexist with people from other backgrounds, in this case. So that's a good example. Another good example is, for example, potentially Edmonton's Heritage Festival. If you have never been to Edmonton, we have this park, Horek Park. It's a big park. I want to say it's somewhere at the beginning of August each year. We have this Heritage Festival that goes like a little less than a week, right? And it features dozens of different culture groups, the national groups, the regions in the world. And we have volunteers from their culture groups and other volunteers. And there's so many food and music and dance and other cultural products that are shared, and you can buy and you can taste and all that. It's really nice event. Like thousands of people visit this festival each year. Of course, COVID changed that a little bit, definitely. But this is a good example of pluralism, potentially, because there are, coexistence literally next to each other of different cultures, different beliefs, different customs, different lifestyles, right, that are exhibited. That's very different from the previous example of the diversity, focusing on one certain type of the differences, and their uniqueness. And of course, I have a little bit of things about this Heritage Festival because I'm not sure. It's Japanese. I'm not sure about the quality of Japanese food per se here, but that's okay. It's a fun event. So if you've ever been to Edmonton, if you've never been to Edmonton, it's one thing that you can check out and you can see a pluralism in action, right? So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to see you in the next video. Bye now.